Hi, friends, and welcome to episode 27 of Jen and Matt Talk About the Bible. We are in Advent Week 2. This is the week of peace. And we are looking at Isaiah 40, verses 1 through 11. Do you want me to just read?
Yep.
All right. That's what we're doing. Comfort, O comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and cry to her that she has served her term, that that her penalty is paid, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. A voice cries out, in the wilderness prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be lifted, every mountain and hill be made low, and the uneven ground shall become level, and the rough places a plain. Then the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all people shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. A voice says, cry out. And I said, what shall I cry? All people are grass, their constancy is like the flower of the field. The grass withers, the flower fades, when the breath of the Lord blows upon it. Surely the people are grass. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God will stand forever. Get you up to a high mountain, O Zion, herald of good tidings. Lift up your voice with strength. O Jerusalem, herald of good tidings, lift it up, do not fear. Say to the cities of Judah, here is your God. See, the Lord God comes with might, and his arm rules him forever. His reward is with him, and his recompense before him. He will feed his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arms and carry them in his bosom and gently lead the mother sheep.
There's so much here.
Oh,
it's so good.
So good. So I'm going to admit I'm a little bit confused about the voices because a voice cry, like at verse 6, a voice says, cry out, and I say, what shall I cry?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who's this voice? Who is speaking?
Mm-hmm.
Also, I think like the context is super important.
Okay.
So this is addressed to the exiles from, like they were exiles from Jerusalem, from Judah. So Jerusalem is the capital city in Judah. Those exiles, people have been taken away into Babylon. Babylon invaded, took people, and took mostly like the elites, the government, but a whole bunch of people were taken away and they're living in exile in Babylon. There are people still remaining in Jerusalem, but things are just a total mess. It's chaos. Like it's like there's still people in the land, but they've lost everything, and the key core people that are running the country are gone. And that's not been a good experience.
I would imagine not.
So that's the context of this, and that kind of is addressed starting at Isaiah 40, what most scholars will say is second Isaiah. Kind of comes in at Isaiah 40, right? So that's really important. So in this first part, comfort, O comfort my people, says your God, speak tenderly to Jerusalem and cry to her that she has served her term, that her penalty is paid, that she's received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. That's talking about the exile has happened.
And it's time, like you've done your time.
Let's now look ahead to going home.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
And Jerusalem here, I think in this part, I think Jerusalem is being used as an all-encompassing term to say like all of God's people, those people in Babylon who are exiled from Jerusalem, and also those people who have were left behind in Jerusalem. And the exile is 50 years long, years. So it's a long time. And I'm not sure, I'd have to go and look to find out like where do scholars think that, like what time exactly is this? Is it how far into the exile are they? I would imagine quite a while. Because now it's sort of this proclamation of we're going to get to go back home now.
Right.
That's sort of the context. And that's important to understand, and also because of these voices. So a voice cries out. I'm just going to say that is God's voice. That is the divine voice that is talking to the prophet. Okay. So the divine voice is saying to the prophet, in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. Or here's another tricky thing, is that like punctuation. There's no punctuation in Hebrew. So we have a voice cries out, colon, quotation marks. In the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. But actually it could be a voice cries out in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. I think the first way is right, the way it is in the NRSV makes more sense for the context, because the voice is crying out to people who are actually physically not in the wilderness.
Right.
They are in Babylon, likely connected to a city, and the saying the voice is crying out in the wilderness, like actually get out. You're going to go out and you're going to prepare the way of the Lord in the wilderness. Literally, there's a wilderness between Babylon and Jerusalem to get back home.
Right.
And you're going to prepare this in that desert, a highway. Highway is like an easier path, and that all of the other stuff kind of starts to fall into place, right? This idea of the valley will be lifted up, every mountain and hill be made low, the uneven ground shall become level. So God is going to make this it won't be a difficult journey. God is going to pave the way for you to be able to go. Right? And then the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and everyone will see it. So yeah, they'll see the people returning. You want me to keep going?
Yes.
With the voices?
Yes, I do. I think this is good.
Okay, so then you get to verse 6, which is where your original question. Sorry, it took me like 6 minutes.
No, but that's helpful to set it up.
Okay.
And I appreciate the wilderness and the context of where the Israelites are at in this. I think that's actually really great.
Yeah.
It also feels very familiar, like we're in the wilderness. We won't go there though.
So this voice, so initially the divine voice is crying out, I think, saying to the prophet, go and do this, like get things ready, go and do this. And the verse 6 is the repetition of that. So it's just a reminder. It's right. So the divine voice again is saying, so cry out. Like I've cried out to you. Now you go and cry out to the people. Right? Okay. You've got to go tell them now. Okay. This is what we're going to do. Here's the plan of what we're going to do. Now go and tell them.
So if that's that, then this is where I get a little bit confused is after this. So, and I said, what shall I cry?
Right.
And then we have this section about the people are grass, which is repeated again, verse 7 and verse 8. The grass withers, the flower fades. Is that, like, do you think that that's a place where it turns again of whose voice is being spoken?
Yeah. So again, it's not clear in most Bibles, right? So, like who's talking? It's hard to figure that out. So the divine voice says, cry out. And I said, what shall I cry? And our quotation marks end there. And then it just goes into this. Nebulous. And now a reflection on all people are like grass. I think actually an interesting way, I've never thought of this before, other than like just preparing for us talking about this, is to think that maybe the prophet's still talking. Like maybe the prophet is saying, what shall I cry? All people are like are grass. Their constancy is like the flower of the field. The grass withers, the flower fades. When the breath of the Lord blows upon it, surely the people are grass. As in he's maybe saying back to God, this isn't going to work. What could I possibly say? I would read this almost like a literal metaphor. Can you have a literal metaphor?
Sure.
I don't know if you can do that, but saying like people are like grass dies, as in these people are going to be dead. Mm-hmm. We're dying here in exile. We've been dying in exile. You're saying there's going to be this amazing highway going back. I don't see it. People are dying and they're going to be dead. We can't do this. But you had brought up with me a different reading of the grass, which I think is applicable, actually.
Okay. I had said, like, I read this more as that they're like grass withers and flowers fades, not so much of death, but of maybe more so like a spiritual death or like not getting it right. No, they're clearly not thriving.
Right. But I think both of those work.
I think both are good, yeah.
Because even if the prophet's still talking and saying, what shall I cry? If we go with yours, it's kind of like, well, what could I possibly say to convince people that they're going to go along on this journey? Because they're basically like grass, and they just, come up and
now you expect us to go hike through the wilderness again? Are you nuts?
Exactly. Like we are not up for this.
Totally.
Is maybe it.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of interesting to think that maybe the prophet's talking all the way to the end of verse 7. And then maybe God's voice comes back in at verse 8, actually, and says, yeah, the grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God will stand forever. So get you up to a high mountain, O Zion, herald of good tidings. So go and tell them, I'm still commissioning you to take the message. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. People die literally and spiritually, or are there, what was it? The constancy is like the flower of the field, right? Like that. Yeah. We're not consistent. We just come and go in our hearts. And God says, yeah, that's true. But my word stands forever. Mm-hmm. So go and share it, as in God's word can actually give life to these people who can actually make the journey, right?
That's good.
Yeah. So
we see then he commands the prophet to go up to this high mountain and to make a proclamation.
Yep.
Lift up your voice with strength, lift it up and do not fear. And that's to say to the cities of Judah, because it almost looks like we're pointing back. You talked about there's some people who were left behind and they're still there. They are the cities, even though it's in shambles, they're the cities of Judah.
Right. And actually in verse 9, depending on which translation you're reading, I actually again think their NRSV, which is what we normally read, is maybe not the best translation here, because it actually says, it's basically saying Zion, which is Mount Zion is a synonym for Jerusalem. Jerusalem is built on Mount Zion, right? So anytime you see Zion, you can substitute Jerusalem in, essentially. But in the NRSV, it makes it sound like Zion is the herald of good tidings, is the one bringing the good news, and Jerusalem is the one who's bringing good news. But actually, the text, the Hebrew text can be read that this herald is bringing good news to Zion and to Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. Okay, and I think that's a better reading, because it seems like it's the divine voice telling the prophet, you know what, get up to a high mountain so that you can bring the good news back home literally to Jerusalem, literally to the other cities of Judah. Mm-hmm. So he has this two-pronged approach, right? It's where he's saying, okay, tell the exiles in Babylon, it's time to go and have a herald that goes ahead who pronounces this to Jerusalem and to all of the neighboring cities in Judah, that God is acting.
I really
there's this good news coming.
Yeah, and I liked the sending a herald ahead. We were kind of talking about this beforehand. When a conquest has happened and war has, when there's been a victory, a herald goes up ahead and lets, the community where they're returning to say, hey, we've won, come. And so when the people come back home, they're met with
a celebration.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's also used for military victories, or it's hard for us to remember too, because we have the internet and phones and stuff, so we can just go onto Twitter and read the news and see what the latest announcement is.
Right.
But for them, it's a new king is born, for instance. Or some major political shift has happened. You have to send a herald. You have to send somebody who goes and proclaims the news. And in this case, it's good news. It's glad tidings. And so this herald goes. But I really like that the statement is, say to the cities of Judah, here is your God. Because when the people had been exiled, there's chaos left. Yeah. And there's no centralized understanding of how is worship happening. The temple was destroyed. There's no sense of how does this even work? How did this even happen? Where didn't we have the right God, and what's going on? And now the exiles return, the community is going to be restored, and that is the visible sign of God being present among them. And it's like, here it is. Here, God is, it's not that God left, but in a sense, the communal feeling is that God is gone, like God has left. It feels like we've been abandoned. And then they return, and there's going to be this restoration, and it'll be this communal sense of God has returned. And that's the announcement that's there, right? Mm-hmm. And then you get the beautiful last two verses. Maybe you should just read those last two verses, and then, because that's sort of gives you a visual picture of like what it means to have this community restored and have God in the midst of it.
Absolutely. See, the Lord God comes with might, and his arm rules for him. His reward is with him, and his recompense before him. He will feed his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arms and carry them in his bosom and gently lead the mother sheep.
Yeah. And I think like last week we talked about how we have a sense that, we really want to hope. And it's hard to know like, well, what are we hoping in? And I feel like the people in this time, it's sort of the same thing. Like, dare they hope that God is going to restore their community and set things right? And this actually is like, last week's reading ended with like, and God, like, please just say, like, bring us your word, tell us. And in some ways, like, this is a response to that, even though these are addressing two different times in Israel's history. Mm-hmm. But I feel like the people who designed the lectionary put this one after because it's like a response, right? In our lives, it's a response to kind of hear like, here is the word coming from God. And the prophet is in some ways almost, in a way, sort of doubting, can this work? And God just says, yeah, like, go out there and believe it can actually work. Proclaim the word. This is the restoration that's coming. He's going to gather the lambs in his arms, carry them in his bosom, and gently lead the mother sheep.
I want to leave us with reiterating what you just said. You asked the question, or that they would ask the question, dare we even hope?
Right.
I want to encourage us to dare to hope. We definitely need more hope. Hold on to it tightly. Pray for it daily. And allow this image of the shepherd feeding the flock, being gathered as lambs in his arms and carried in his bosom, and the mother sheep being led. Allow that to bring comfort. We opened this text with comfort, and I want to close it with comfort with that. So dare to hope, friends. We'll see you next week.